Imagine for a second that you're looking at a piece of paper on a bureaucrat's desk. It's a completely mundane administrative document.
Yeah.
Just a simple revocation of a tourist visa.
Right, just a regular form.
Yeah, just a little red stamp denying entry, or in this case, invalidating an existing one. Now, what if I told you that to truly understand the forces behind that single drop of ink, you had to zoom all the way out, like way out.
Oh, yeah, they're way out.
You'd have to look at a century-long ideological battle and trace dark money networks spanning from Washington to Moscow. And you'd have to factor in the impending global scarcity of natural resources.
It sounds wild when you put it like that.
It sounds like the plot of a dystopian thriller, right?
Yeah.
But according to the materials we're diving into today, it might just be the reality of modern governance.
It is a massive leap to make. Taking a seemingly dry administrative tweak and extrapolating it out to a global civilizational shift is, well, it's not a natural reflex for most of us.
No, definitely not.
But that is exactly the journey these sources are asking us to take today.
And it's a journey we really need to unpack carefully. Today, our deep dive is pulling from two very different but highly connected sources. First, we have an Al Jazeera report that details a specific ground-level immigration policy action taken during the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And second, we have a series of pretty extensive excerpts from Dr. Nafeez Ahmed's 2025 book, Alt-Right, The Network War to Destroy the West from Within. And look, before we get into the weeds here, I want to be incredibly clear about our mission on this deep dive.
Absolutely.
We are dealing with highly charged political theories and some intense socioeconomic claims. So our goal today is not to take a political side, endorse any policies, or validate these specific theories. We are strictly unpackaging the arguments and reporting presented in these specific sources so you, the listener, can understand the concepts being discussed.
I think that's the best way to approach this.
Yeah.
If you want to understand a massive theoretical framework like Dr. Ahmed's, you can't just, start in the clouds.
Right. You need an anchor.
Exactly. You have to start with something tangible. So we're going to begin at the ground level, looking at the concrete policy reported by Al Jazeera to understand the raw mechanics of state power in action.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because once we see how the policy actually functions, then we can step back and use Dr. Ahmed's framework to explore the historical pipelines and the financial networks.
Global economic triggers?
Right, the global economic triggers that he argues are secretly driving these everyday policies.
Okay, let's start at that ground level then. The Al Jazeera report we're looking at, it details a major, highly visible administrative mandate from the Trump administration. They initiated a mass cancellation of B1 and B2 visas.
Right.
And for anyone not fluent in U.S. immigration acronyms, those are just your standard tourist and business visas. The administration specifically targeted up to 200,000 foreign nationals who had already entered the United States on these visas. And then at some point after arriving, they applied for asylum.
Yeah, they essentially strip them of their underlying non-immigrant status.
Which sounds like a huge deal.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the justification provided by the State Department officials in the report, their messaging is entirely focused on the integrity of the immigration system.
Okay.
Their argument publicly frames the use of visitor visas by asylum seekers as a deliberate loophole. A loophole designed to circumvent immigration law.
Oh, I see.
They use pretty strong language, actually, characterizing the resulting asylum applications as, quote, bogus claims. The logic they present to the public is fairly straightforward. They say these individuals lied about their intent when they applied for a tourist visa, and therefore that visa should be immediately revoked.
Okay, let's unpack this, because on the surface, to a lot of people, that logic might track.
Oh, sure.
If you said you were coming to the U.S. to visit Disney World, but your actual intent the whole time was to flee political persecution and seek asylum, well, you broke the rules of the tourist visa.
Right, you misrepresented your intentions.
Exactly. So you lose the visa. It sounds like a basic breach of contract. But the source material highlights a massive point of friction here regarding how U.S. statutory law actually functions in reality, right?
That is the crucial caveat right there. This is where the migration policy experts cited in the article step in to clarify the legal reality, which, as we know, is often much messier than a press release.
Always.
Under U.S. law and indeed under international legal frameworks that the U.S. is signatory to an individual, has the statutory right to request asylum once they are physically present on U.S. soil.
Just by being there.
Yes, physically present.
Yeah.
And critically, that right exists regardless of how they arrived or what visa they hold.
Wait, really? So it doesn't matter if they took a plane or walked across?
Exactly. Even if they crossed a border irregularly or overstayed a tourist visa, the right to make the asylum claim remains. So here is the friction point the experts point out. Revoking that B1 or B2 visa does not automatically cancel a pending asylum hearing.
Okay, wait, so the statutory right to have that asylum claim heard in a court of law remains completely intact.
Completely intact.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm visualizing this correctly. To use an analogy, it sounds like you're allowed to sit in the waiting room for a job interview, but the building manager just walked up and revoked your security badge.
That's a really good way to put it.
Right, so technically your interview is still on the books. You still have a legal right to be seen by the hiring manager, but you no longer have the credentials to safely stay in the building. You could be escorted out by security at any moment before they even call your name.
That is a highly accurate, if slightly terrifying way to visualize it. You are thrust into a state of extreme legal limbo.
Right.
You are technically permitted to wait for your hearing, but you are completely undocumented and vulnerable while you wait. And this raises an important question that the Al Jazeera piece wrestles with. If the administration knows that revoking the visa doesn't legally cancel the asylum hearing, what is the actual utility of doing it?
Yeah, why spend the massive administrative bandwidth to stamp 200,000 files if it doesn't actually close the cases? It seems wildly...
It is inefficient if your goal is just processing cases. But according to the experts in the source, the true purpose isn't strictly legal case management. It is political and operational.
Oh, okay.
First, it acts as a high-visibility political statement to a domestic base. It shows toughness,
Yeah, playing to the crowd.
Exactly. But more importantly, on an operational level, it acts as a fierce deterrent. By stripping that underlying legal status, the state creates immense administrative friction and extreme legal vulnerability for the asylum seeker.
So they're just making it as hard as possible.
Right. It makes the physical process of waiting for that legally mandated hearing so precarious and so fraught with the daily risk of detention or deportation that the administration hopes many will simply abandon the claim entirely.
Wow. Which honestly leads us to a much bigger question, and this is where we start crossing over into the territory of Dr. Nafeez Ahmed's book. I read that section and thought, why would a government prioritize creating this kind of agonizing administrative friction? Like, why deliberately make an established post-World War II legal process so difficult and perilous to navigate?
Wow.
Why not just pass a law to end asylum if they hate it so much?
Because abruptly ending a universally recognized human right is incredibly difficult to do in a modern democracy. It causes international uproar and massive domestic legal challenges.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This is where we begin to see what Ahmed calls the recoding of our legal language. He argues that a central foundational strategy of the modern far right is the deliberate reframing of established human rights protocols.
Okay.
Think about international asylum rights. They were established globally in the wake of the atrocities of World War II. For decades, they were viewed across the political spectrum as basic, universal humanitarian protections.
Right, the whole never again consensus, the idea that if someone is running for their life from a dictator, you don't just lock the door.
Exactly. But Ahmed's thesis details how this specific political network is systematically recoding those statutory legal paths in the public consciousness.
So they're changing how we talk about it.
Yes. They don't attack the concept of human rights directly. Instead, they reframe the specific legal mechanisms of asylum, not as rights, but as exploitative loopholes.
Oh, I see.
They paint them as illegitimate, corrupt, or deceptive mechanisms used by dangerous outsiders to take advantage of the generosity of the host nation.
I see. So it's a linguistic sleight of hand. But what is the ultimate end goal of that reframing? Is it just about winning the news cycle?
Oh, it goes much deeper than the news cycle. It is about generating political legitimacy for authoritarian executive overreach.
Okay.
Ahmed argues that if you can convince the broader public that a fundamental legal right like asylum is actually a dangerous, corrupt loophole threatening the nation, the public will applaud you when you use extraordinary, even constitutionally questionable executive power to slam it shut.
Because they think you're protecting them.
Right. You are no longer seen as a tyrant dismantling a human right. You are celebrated as a strong man fixing a broken, corrupt system.
And when you look at our sources, it becomes incredibly clear that this specific visa cancellation isn't happening in a vacuum.
No, not at all.
The texts specifically note that this mass cancellation coincides with a whole suite of other highly aggressive actions. We're talking about executive orders attempting to restrict birthright citizenship, sweeping visa bans targeting dozens of specific countries, and highly visible militarized ICE enforcement raids in communities.
Right. And if we connect all of these data points to the bigger picture, Ahmed argues unequivocally that these are not isolated administrative tweaks.
They're part of a plan.
Exactly. They are not random policy decisions made by different departments. He views them as a highly coordinated, multi-front campaign.
Wow.
The overarching goal of this campaign is to fundamentally redefine national identity, to institutionalize nativist political agendas, and ultimately to normalize a baseline of state hostility toward non-citizens.
Okay, but a coordinated multi-front campaign requires a massive amount of organization.
It does.
And honestly, a lot of modern populism, the rallies, the online outrage, the sudden aggressive shifts in political rhetoric to the average observer, it feels incredibly spontaneous.
It does feel that way.
It feels like a genuine, if volatile, grassroots reaction to modern life. But Ahmed uses a framework, he calls it systems journalism, to argue that this spontaneity is a complete illusion.
It's an important distinction to make. Systems journalism, as Ahmed defines it, means not just reporting on a single event or a single politician's speech, but analyzing the underlying structures, the historical pipelines, and the massive financial flows that actually produce that event.
So looking at the factory instead of just the product.
That's a great way to put it. And when Ahmed applies this framework, he traces the ideological foundations of what we call the modern far or the alt-right back a full century.
100 years.
Yes, 100 years. He argues these ideas are not a new phenomenon spawned by the internet. They are deeply rooted in early 20th century movements, specifically eugenics, scientific racism, and early fascist theory.
And here is where I really have to push back or at least play devil's advocate, because the obvious historical roadblock for that theory is 1945.
Sure.
The end of World War II. The global repudiation of fascism and the horrors of the Holocaust made those specific ideologies radioactive. I mean, how on earth does Ahmed argue that these ideas survived the absolute crushing defeat of Nazi Germany to influence a visa policy in the 2020s?
It's a fantastic question, and Ahmed spends a significant portion of the text answering it. According to his research, they didn't vanish.
They mutated.
Right, following World War II, the overt language of racial supremacy and fascism was, as you said, politically toxic. You couldn't run for office in a Western democracy using that vocabulary.
No, you'd be laughed out of the room or worse.
Exactly. So these ideological frameworks went underground, or rather they cloaked themselves in academic and institutional respectability. They survived through specialized, highly funded intellectual networks, conservative philanthropic trusts, and pseudoscientific journals.
So they basically stopped wearing uniforms and started wearing suits.
That is exactly it.
They retreated into think tanks.
Right.
But how do you launder an idea that's toxic? I mean, how do you take the core tenets of eugenics and make them palatable to a modern voter?
You execute a massive, decades-long rebranding campaign.
Wow.
Ahmed details how these networks took their core concepts, the perceived necessity of racial hierarchy, the intense fear of demographic replacement, the belief in elite authoritarian dominance, and they repackaged them entirely.
Okay, what did that look like?
They began to sell these ideas under the guise of protecting freedom, defending Western civilization, championing absolute national sovereignty, and promoting hardline economic libertarianism.
So they just changed the labels.
Exactly. The vocabulary changed entirely, focusing on culture and economics rather than biology. But Ahmed argues the underlying hierarchical goals remained exactly the same.
So protecting the genetic hierarchy becomes protecting the cultural heritage.
Right.
But even if they rebranded successfully in these think tanks, the sheer scale of what the text describes next is staggering.
Yeah.
We aren't just talking about a few fringe academics in a basement somewhere publishing newsletters.
Not at all. Ahmed maps out a vast transcontinental nexus, a heavily fortified architecture that spans major global power centers. The text specifically highlights a geographical pipeline connecting Washington, London, Brussels, Amsterdam, Budapest, and Moscow.
That is a massive geographical footprint, and frankly, confusing one.
Yeah, it seems contradictory.
Right, Washington and Moscow in the same ideological network. Historically, those are geopolitical rivals. How does a network that vast with such strange bedfellows actually operate?
The sources break the operation down into two main phases: financial infrastructure and institutional capture.
Okay, let's break those down.
So the financial infrastructure is the engine. We are talking about vast networks of dark money, hyper-conservative foundations, and immense capital injections from tech and fossil fuel oligarchs.
So basically limitless funding.
Right. This capital is used to fund policy centers, draft ready-made legislation, and create sprawling alternative media channels and digital platforms.
And what about the U.S. and Russia aligning?
As for Moscow and Washington aligning, Ahmed argues that for these oligarchic networks' shared ideological goals, specifically the desire for nationalistic authoritarian control and the dismantling of progressive regulatory democracies, those goals override traditional Cold War rivalries.
So the billionaires in one country realize they have more in common with the billionaires in the rival country than they do with their own working class.
Precisely. The ideology of wealth and control transcends national borders.
Okay, so they build this massive financial machine. They fuel it with oligarchic wealth across multiple continents, and then what? Because you can't just buy a country outright.
Not usually, no.
And they don't seem to just run third-party candidates right. That rarely works in entrenched two-party systems.
No, running third-party candidates is highly inefficient. This is where the mechanism of institutional capture comes in.
Okay.
Ahmed details how this network systematically targeted mainstream, established conservative apparatuses. Instead of fighting from the outside, they burrowed into the existing architecture of state power.
How does that actually work mechanically? Like, how does a fringe rebranded eugenics movement capture a mainstream political party?
By using that massive financial infrastructure to primary moderate candidates. By supplying parties with pre-written policy papers.
Oh, so doing the homework for them.
Exactly, and by using their alternative media networks to dictate the terms of debate for the party base. The text cites the successful capture of the U.S. Republican Party, the radicalization of Britain's right, specifically mentioning the Conservative Party and Reform UK, and the deep symbiotic integration with Viktor Orban's regime in Hungary.
Wow, so it's happening everywhere at once.
Yeah, they launder their extreme, rebranded, 100-year-old ideologies through the trusted, established brands of mainstream political parties. It provides an immediate veneer of legitimacy.
Okay, I follow the logic of the institutional capture. But this brings up a massive glaring question that I struggled with while reading Ahmed's book.
What's that?
If, as the author argues, these policies are ultimately designed by billionaires and oligarchs to entrench elite power, dismantle regulations, and protect massive concentrations of wealth, how on earth do they get everyday working-class voters to support them?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just knock on a door in a swing state in the U.S. or a working-class town in the U.K. and say, hey, vote for our guy so the tech billionaires and fossil fuel executives can keep all the money and gut your labor rights.
No, that is not a winning platform.
It's not.
It is the central paradox of modern populism. And what's fascinating here is how Ahmed answers it by exploring the strategic weaponization of culture wars. To build a mass democratic constituency for elite-driven economic policies that actually harm the working class. This network relies on tailored, highly sophisticated disinformation campaigns designed to fracture and divide democratic societies.
It's the ultimate bait and switch.
It really is. It
Yeah.
is the deliberate, calculated generation of in-group versus out-group polarization. Let's ground this in reality for a second.
Sure.
When a working-class citizen feels the very real, visceral pain of systemic economic instability, when their wages have stagnated for a decade, when their rent skyrockets, when their local hospital closes or their factory gets offshored, the pain is real.
Very real.
The network steps in not to solve the economic issue, but to redirect the anger generated by it.
So instead of allowing the public to examine structural economic issues or corporate monopolies or wealth hoarding, they point the finger somewhere else?
Precisely. The network weaponizes anti-migrant, anti-Muslim, anti-Black, and anti-Semitic tropes.
Okay.
They provide a highly visible scapegoat. They reframe complex macroeconomic reality so that all local instability is somehow the fault of vulnerable minorities crossing the border.
Yeah.
Or alternatively vague, shadowy globalist elites orchestrating the decay of the nation's culture.
It transforms very rational economic anxiety into a visceral, existential cultural fear.
Exactly. And fear is a incredibly powerful motivator at the ballot box.
And tying this all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, back to the Al Jazeera article and the 200,000 canceled visas, this cultural fear provides the necessary smokescreen to dismantle legal protections.
Yes.
If you can convince a struggling public that international laws, whether it's human rights frameworks, climate agreements, or international asylum laws, are actually just Trojan horses designed to destroy their national identity and steal their jobs, well, the public will gladly hand you the sledgehammer to smash those laws.
And in doing so, the citizens unknowingly dismantle the very concepts of universal legal protection and government accountability that they themselves rely on. They vote to dismantle the guardrails of democracy because they believe the guardrails are what's hurting them.
Oh, wow. So what does this all mean?
Uh,
We have a century-old ideology that survived the 1940s by rebranding itself. We have a massive transnational network funded by billionaires operating inside mainstream political parties. And they are using tailored culture wars to distract the public while they dismantle human rights and consolidate power.
This is the summary, yeah.
But why? Why go through all of this effort right now? I mean, we've had billionaires, we've had racism, and we've had inequality for centuries. What is the catalyst for this massive, coordinated global push at this specific moment in history?
This is the absolute core of Ahmed's work. This is his systems thesis. He applies a biophysical and systems theory of political violence to explain the ultimate why.
Okay.
He argues that the rise of this modern alt-right is not just a random cyclical swing of the political pendulum. It is not just a passing phase. It is a direct, deliberate, and panicked reaction to the onset of what he calls the planetary phase shift.
The planetary phase shift, that sounds incredibly ominous.
It does.
What does that actually entail in practical terms?
It refers to a converging, unprecedented global crisis. We are not just talking about one issue here. We are talking about the collision of severe climate instability, rapid resource depletion, meaning water, arable land, cheap energy, and terminal economic stagnation.
So everything hitting the wall at once.
Exactly. According to Ahmed, industrial civilization is fundamentally hitting its environmental and biophysical limits. For the last 2 centuries, our global economic model has been based on infinite growth. Ahmed argues the era of limitless cheap expansion is definitively over.
Okay, I understand the concept of hitting ecological limits. How does that connect back to the billionaires funding the political think tanks in Washington and London? How does resource depletion trigger this specific political network?
It comes down to elite wealth preservation. For the last century, democratic governance has managed to coexist alongside massive, sometimes grotesque concentrations of elite wealth. And it largely worked because the overall economic pie was growing. Even if the elite took the lion's share, there were still enough crumbs falling off the table to sustain a middle class and keep the public relatively content.
Yeah, everybody was getting a little richer, so nobody looked too closely at the very top.
Precisely. But as we hit these hard planetary limits, as resources shrink and economies stagnate, the pie stops growing. It might even start shrinking.
And when the pie stops growing, that coexistence shatters.
It shatters completely.
Because democratic governance, by its very nature, demands the equitable sharing of resources.
Oh.
If a population is starving or lacks water or can't afford housing, a functioning democracy gives them the mechanism to vote to distribute the wealth of the oligarchs to ensure collective survival.
Exactly.
So in a world of severe scarcity, democracy itself becomes a direct existential threat to concentrated wealth.
That is the exact dynamic Ahmed identifies. To prevent the democratic redistribution of their wealth in an era of scarcity, the elites must act proactively. This brings us to the final, chilling synthesis of Ahmed's thesis: the strategies of enclosure and exclusion.
Enclosure and exclusion. Okay, let's break that down because I feel like this ties everything we've talked about together.
It really does. Under Ahmed's framework, the authoritarian tactics we've been discussing all hour, the border militarization, the mass deportations, the administrative cruelty of the visa cancellations, the sprawling state surveillance apparatuses, these are not just the ideological quirks of populist leaders who happen to be xenophobic.
They're not just accidents.
No, they are a highly calculated, deliberate elite defense mechanism. They are the physical and legal architecture required to manage civilizational breakdown.
To manage the collapse.
Exactly. The goal is to aggressively enclose the world's dwindling resources for the elite and brutally exclude the broader global public from accessing them, using the militarized power of the state to enforce that boundary.
So the cruelty isn't just a byproduct of bad policy.
No,
The cruelty is the actual mechanism of resource management.
that's right.
The border walls aren't just there to keep out a different culture. They are there to hoard the remaining water, food, and capital.
Enclosure and exclusion.
Wow. Okay. We have covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by looking at a specific Trump administration policy reported by Al Jazeera, the cancellation of up to 200,000 tourist visas for asylum seekers. We explored how the State Department justified it and the agonizing legal friction it created for vulnerable people.
And from there, we used Dr. Nafeez Ahmed's systems journalism framework to contextualize that single policy within a much larger, darker narrative of global power.
We trace the 100-year lineage of eugenics mutating and rebranding itself as the defense of Western civilization.
Yeah.
We mapped a massive transnational financial network, funneling oligarchic wealth into mainstream political parties across the US, the UK, and Europe.
Institutional capture.
Yep. We unpacked the cynical weaponization of the culture war, how marginalized groups are used as scapegoats for systemic economic failures to trick voters into giving up their own rights.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. And finally, we arrived at the systems thesis. The terrifying idea that modern political authoritarianism is fundamentally an elite reaction to global resource scarcity, a desperate attempt to enclose and hoard the remaining wealth as we enter a planetary phase shift.
It is a sobering, heavy framework, to say the least. It asks us to reevaluate almost everything we see on the evening news. And it leaves us with a critical, incredibly challenging concept to consider as we look to the future.
Let's hear it. What's the final thought we should be chewing on?
If Dr. Ahmed's systems thesis is correct, if these highly visible, incredibly toxic culture wars and these harsh, publicized immigration crackdowns are ultimately just a sophisticated smokescreen for elite wealth preservation in the face of converging global crises, what happens to the political landscape when the broader public finally realizes the trick?
Oh, wow.
What happens when the average citizen figures out that the resources they are being told to fiercely protect from outsiders are actually being systematically hoarded from above?
That would be an explosion.
And perhaps more urgently, on a practical level, how does a society effectively protect its democratic governance and demand equality when the very physical and biophysical resources required to sustain that society are shrinking every single day? We are back in that waiting room, our security badges have been revoked, and the building itself is rapidly running out of air.
A profound and unsettling question to end on. It definitely reframes how you look at the next political headline you read. Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep reading, keep questioning the systems around you, and we will see you next time.